Everybody today. So we are going to talk about operational excellence, and let's hope this thing is working excellently, which it isn't. Can you maybe help me to change the slide there because the clicker isn't working? No one back, please. Yes. So we have the unique opportunity this day that we have a bit of space. You know, it's always hard to go into conferences. Sometimes they have the round tables. This is the first time I'm seeing actually this kind of cinema setup to make sure you guys get a bit accustomed to each other. What I would like you to do is everybody put away their smartphones, which is often already a problem at the beginning of the conference. Everybody getting up, please. Looking for a partner. So pair up, use the aisles, looking for a partner somewhere, find yourself a partner, face that partner now, and introduce yourself quickly by the name, right? And don't make it too long. Don't go into long conversation, right? Yeah, well, good, good. Okay, let's leave it at the name level, ladies and gentlemen. Let's leave it at the name level. I'm already losing control here. Everybody, hello? Hello, everybody. Hello? Good name is good enough. Please pay attention to the speaker again. Please pay attention to the speaker again. Yes, I have now the attention of 90% of the people. 95, 98, 100%. Good. Everyone's paying attention. I know we're getting into a speak and we want to introduce each other. We have enough time afterwards. So what you're going to do now, you look at each other for 30 seconds. You look at each other. You don't talk. Look at each other. Don't talk for 30 seconds. I'm counting here. Let's go. Not just the face, please. All right, look at the whole person. Okay, I think that was enough to make you uncomfortable. Now turn 180 degrees, turn back to each other, burn back to each other. Now everyone is changing 5 things on their appearances. 5 things. Let's go. 30 seconds. Change something. 5 things. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. So even if it's 3 in the end, that's fine. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And turn each other again. Turn around and now take 30 seconds to figure out what has changed with the other person.
Circle, burn, sorry. E vais, Zaki, depois, see, switch inside to your jacket. It is, oh, from, I didn't manage to fight. That would be too dramatic.
So if it didn't start yet, the other person also pointing out the changes, if that's the case. So please also make aware what was missed. So please tell the other person also what was missed, if anything. So who, by shows of hand, who got all the changes? By shows of hand, who got all the changes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-ish. Okay, somewhat, right? 20%. So thank you for playing along. Please take your seat again, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
So, thank you very much for playing along, right? We talk about enabling organizational change and often enabling changes by involving folks, right? Involving people and trying to evolve this clicker that is still not working. So, please Go to the next slide, then I'll just point it out like that, right? We talk about, as I'm already saying, operational excellence. Unfortunately, tech league is a bit difficult. Just a few words to Bavarian Nordic. This morning, people already asked me, are you from Novo Nordisk, right? Novo Nordisk, a big player in the space of Denmark. No, I'm not, right? And Bavarian Nordic, who is Bavarian Nordic, you might ask. I ask myself as well, right? And we're taken over by Bavarian Nordic 1.5 years ago in beautiful Switzerland, and they're a vaccine manufacturer. So in a nutshell, right, you have here someone who's protecting themselves against some deadly disease. You can do that on a vacation, but you can also take a vaccine, right? So this is just illustrate and try to visualize what we're doing, right, in terms of vaccine production. Next slide, please. Speak to value, right? You always hear in those conferences to learn something, right? And peak to value as well. So you can hardly see it. Speak and peak to value. I hopefully provide today a bit of a value to you by this presentation and that we can learn from each other. And please, next slide. Let's zoom out. Let's start zooming out first. Take the big picture view, right? Next slide. So what I did here is making it a bit less personal. We're in a pharma biotech conference today. What you see here is Porsche and BYD. What BYD? Some people have not even heard about this company. If you look at their share prices, you see for yourself, right, between 2021 and 2025, it's quite a difference, right? If you spec it on top of each other, these guys, which are kind of five-folding themselves, whilst Porsche was going down pretty much five-folds themselves, right? This is just to make it less personal, but the same is true in pharma, right? So we in Europe in general, as like start lacking behind a bit. It's a painful truth, but why is that, right? These guys are making software and wheels, and by the way, this is just a visually appealing picture here from the cars, but this could also be any other car for that matter, right? And this true story is still the same also here in pharma. So let's go to the next slide to try to illustrate that a bit more in the industry. I don't go into all to the details because we're already running short on time, but here's a bit of a cutoff. Some people might have heard of a VUCA, right? Volatile uncertainty, more complex, more ambiguous. That sort of seems to be the new normal, but it actually is the new normal, right? That is just the change is happening ever faster. There's lots of pressure on our industry as well as in life science. Next slide, please. Here, just a double click on those particular kind of categories, but I don't want to again waste time. I have more this in the mind of like you scrolling through an Instagram feed, right? If you pick out the information is important for you, like before when you were facing each other, right? To try to pick out the information that has changed instead of I'm giving you here a lot of information that might replicate through the day. Next slide, please. How do we stay relevant then in this environment? I'll try to illustrate it on the next slide. Irrelevant or relevant in the future will be, next slide, please, will be defined by one category here, right? So this is from the World Economic Forum. You have here the share of employees considering a score kill in 2025, and you're looking at now 2030 in the next 5 years, what is expected to be increased. And if you look at one of them, AI and big data, so no kind of surprises there. But the other one is still around human stuff and analytical thinking, creative thinking, system thinking, right? They're all in those categories. I don't need to memorize all of this, but I will illustrate what this might mean for you personally going forward in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. I was looking for sort of AI maturity. Everyone talks about AI these days, right? Digital transformation, 4.0, 5.0, I even read for someone at this today we'll have the pleasure to listen to. Lots of information. And they try to find a model out there, right? From records to leaders. They're saying, okay, try to sort of illustrate that. I was like, this is not really, I mean, it's great, right? But it's a lot of noise, right? Most of these words I don't even understand what they really mean, right? You need to be an expert to even read this. So next slide, I tried to condense this down in a level which I understood, and forgive me, my intelligence is not the highest in the room here. So I tried to put them into different levels, right? The 5 levels. So many of you know the 5 maturity levels. You explore something, in this case AI, we get active at this, eventually operational, systematic, and then you might become the transformational leader. So what I tried to do here, often we get stuck here already with sort of an awareness exercise. We do some ad hoc projects, and then you have the risk of overhyping. It happens in our kind of company right now. Right? I just think, wow, it's great AI, and the only thing we really do is using a bit of Microsoft Copilot, right? And then many people move on, and as I learned through these different conferences, one of the key messages each time is actually AI data maturity. Otherwise, I was saying shit in, shit out, right? If you don't have the data, then don't even start, right? And that's one of the key messages I hear on every conference, actually. So make sure which data you want to measure and then get that measurement right. Next slide, please. This is just a quick illustration of natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. Most of you know this, but sometimes the hybrid part in between is not always so clearly articulated, right? So I try to sort of put that in there. There's no business strategy and research and healthcare in particular. So there could be some overlaps. We try to illustrate them on the next slide, please, Mr. Technician. Thanks for following along. So now let's make it personal again. You have here different letters, you have here different people doing different things. So here in the room quickly, just shout out some numbers. Wherever you see yourself today in your enterprise, in your environment, which person corresponds the best with how you feel today, where you are working? So just shout out some letters. Who has one for me? Here in front. Which one you identifying the most?
So, top one,
Which would the letter would that be?
E.
E. So what is he doing? You're climbing up. So climbing up the maybe hierarchy there in yeah in an environment. What else? What do we have here? What do you see yourself?
I am in B.
B. She's looking ahead, right? She seems the visionary person. The lady in the orange. Where do you see yourself?
Some dilemma between B and F.
Between B and F. F steering and visionary. Okay. Anyone vomiting over the railing here or? Nobody, or at least not really telling us about it, right? Or someone being on vacation here, or someone just missing the boat, so to speak, right? So this is just to illustrate another example of where do you see yourself and benchmarking yourself a bit, right? Where you might be. Next slide, please. So how do we measure success then? We can go to the next slide. How do you measure success? So either you can be the policeman, right, in terms of performance management, controlling performance, or you can actually inspire folks to be at their best, right, which would be, or more illustrated here with the fastest man on earth, right? So that's just as a visual representation again. And now I see already some scientists already crossing their arms. Florida is going off too crazy here. I want to see the scientific stuff. So let's go into that, please. Next slide, where we can look a bit more into scientific stuff. Who knows this gentleman over here? This is Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor was one of those scientific, as they call it here, scientific management. And I've done this now the last pretty much 15 years, right? This scientific management of standardization, of making sure we specify skills of compartmentalizing. And as AI comes around, more and more companies realize that we should put more attention to the team spirit, right? And team dynamics, because they're outcompete by many, a percentage, as you can see here, and the kind of standardization attempts. It is a bit a risky thing to say on a pharma conference, right? We love our standard operating procedures and work instructions, and we need them, but it's still important to just double click on this. So next slide, please. So let's dive into this. So there's, according to Oxford University and Ernst & Young, that fell out of the slide here, they are saying that 70% of transformation success comes actually mainly from people, right? So you're 2.6 times more likely to succeed in your transformation. And then after that, you have process and tech. And yet I hear so many people, so little people actually really talking about that, right? So double click on that people. Please, next slide, my good friend there. So if you're looking at this now as an iceberg, there's been many icebergs in the last 20 years. So this is one of those icebergs, right? I try to double click on the 70% of people. You will talk a lot about tools and practice and strategies and execution, right? That's the easy stuff to talk about. What is a bit harder to talk about is behavior, values, and mindset. And the stuff on top obviously is more visible, but you also have to have a less impact and inverse underneath. So if you want to do that now, then you can have a look just in a second. Here, the other thing which fell out of the slide, I don't know why, should be the right format actually. So the non-performance cost, right? Thinking about defects of things going wrong, that's easy to measure, but cost of poor quality, which is often under the ground, right? Lost reputation, people being upset and leaving their company. That stuff is often not talked about so much, right? So let's go to the next slide and try to go through this. Human biases, right? I could probably speak the whole morning about human biases. I don't want to go in all of them, but we are biased, all of us. Even if you do lots of research, if you've traveled all over the world, lived in other countries, been exposed to different cultures, languages, etc., you still have biases, right? And this need to be taken into consideration. Without going in all of this, as in seeing just, if you have a nail, then everything is like a hammer, that memory is falsifiable and not very reliable, that our attention senses are not always making sense, right? Just because we see the world in a certain way doesn't mean the world is actually that way, right? So, and the last but not least, the main categories is feelings. Ooh, in a pharma conference, talk about feelings. Lots of scientists, dangerous territory. Let's go to the next slide. Let's find out what I mean with this. So they've now Copilot rolled out, right? We're very much on AI, and I'm certainly not a thought leader in AI, but there's some small applications. And one, I think, a little example I wanted to share with you is the wolf in the sheep's clothing. So this is designed for those who don't know. It's Microsoft Copilot. It helps us, right? Like a Copilot does some things for us. But I found interesting as a manager, fairly senior, who was always a bit short on people, right? Meaning not very emotionally available. Now he uses Copilot, and he's kind of nice all of a sudden because he introduces himself. Hope you're all doing well. I've never heard that from him the last 5 years, right? Hope you're doing well, and then a nice sentence, and I hope you're doing well again on the lead out of that email. The problem with that is it might seem like he's a sheep now, but actually still the wolf in the meeting, right? He all of a sudden has that cognitive disconnect, right? Between how he's behaving with his email, with Copilot, and how he's really as a person. So I found that sort of interesting, and just I wanted to point it out a bit. And let's go to the next slide to maybe look at that a bit more, right? Motivating people. Remember, 70% is motivation by people and not systems and tech and processes. So what motivates people? Do rewards motivate people? Is money really motivating the people? Yes, it motivates us to get more rewards, right? And that if you look into the scientific literature, yes, we all need to be paid fairly, right? Like you're right here, but at a certain point, it doesn't make such a difference anymore. So what does then make a difference after that? Please let's go to the next slide. Here I try to distill all the things I learned in the last more or less 10 years about motivation, right? About human motivation. And not the stuff you learn as in general principles, no, the ones that are kind of inspired from scientific research. So let's start at the beginning here. Autonomy is already the first one. So if you can give people autonomy over the tasks, the teams, and what they should do on the timeline, gives already much more liberty for you to succeed. The other one is belonging, right? We forget sometimes that human nature is a very social creature, very important, right? To really look at that and do not forget it. And the other ones, as in having a challenge in your environment, being creative, being treated fairly, right? That is a kind of a given. Having a purpose makes sense, right? If you know, and we are lucky enough in this industry that we are sort of purposeful work. We are saving people's lives or enhancing people's lives, right? That is much easier to do than maybe let's pitch on smoke. So sorry for the tobacco guys here, right? If you're in a tobacco factory, that's maybe less of a purposeful work than we who can actually save people's lives, right? So that's great to do. The other one here I wanted to point out is mastery. How many hours do you think we need to train to master a skill? Does anyone know roughly? How many hours to really sort of scientifically could measure that? After how many hours?
I don't know.
Very good, right? It's out there. Many people know. That's the 10,000. When you can do your math yourself, how many hours you need to do to really master a skill, right? They do some fighting sport, still not mastering it after 30, 35 years, right? And others do other stuff, and it takes time. Then growth, obviously, if you have a company that is growing, it's much easier to be part of the winning team than actually when if you're losing. Safety, of course, not just safety as in a safe environment. We are lucky here, right? We're all safe. There's no war around us, but also psychological safety, right? Talking about the wolf in the sheep's clothing again. So that you really actually listening to people and give the space for them to breathe and ask them questions, listen to them attentively. Status and values also not to be underestimated, right? So if we can sort of make people shine, not because they're important with their position and their role, but no, because of the work they do and the people they impact, right? If they can inspire them. Then we leave behind, which fell out of the picture here, sort of the legacy behind. And all around it, I guess, you can have sort of motivators as drivers, the generators as such. Then you also shouldn't expect, the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic, again, motivation, right? So the money is one thing, but how you make them feel and the self-starterness of such and being a purposeful work is much better. Here's something you can hardly read is generational factor. Not all the generations speak exactly the same. We are fair here, not so many young folks here, right? So most of us are rather older folks. The young one, they're really looking differently now, right? They're looking differently at work, differently at the macro environment. They're looking differently at where are we going, right? And saving the planet. Those are different values as such. They might change it as generally you're a bit more idealist as we are younger, then maybe you get older, right? So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Let's go to the next slide then. What will remain the same is sort of the people will stay in the driver's seat or here in the flying seat as such, and everything around it, such as process systems and setup, will kind of stay the same. We can optimize on that, right? We can use those the different elements of motivation, but I'm not foreseeing that AI is replacing many of us anytime soon. And if it replaces us, then it will be with the daunting tasks, as far as I can tell, right? For now, but maybe in 10 years, I'm going to spend here and say, I wasn't quite right about that. But in general, I'm not too concerned. Any technology is always, been helping us probably in the long run if we pull together. And then, as in this illustration, you need some, speed to lift against the wind often, right? It's easier to fly against the wind than actually with the wind. So maybe that's as an illustration here. That brings me to the next slide to sort of, I guess, sum it up. Yes, we have tools, right? I talked about motivation, and we'll hear about, hopefully, from other speakers about other tools we can use. But there's two things about that to remember. Yes, believe in yourself, right? It's good to have some confidence, but confidence is not necessarily competence, right? So sometimes that takes a bit of time. So just be sure that you're not pushing yourself too much on here, on believing in your tools, and then they become a dogma, right? Because you mastered them, right? Mastery can become also a bit of a trip hazard there, I guess. So then just be sure you don't end up in the category of being a bit too arrogant, right? And people sometimes tell me I'm arrogant as well, and I take that as a compliment. So one is genetic. I have very thick eyebrows. It's not my fault, right? But other things is just, sometimes we are just pretending, right? And then the more we know, the more we have a learning disability. That's the other thing. So let's just make sure we don't get too arrogant, right? We are staying open, and please challenge me on anything I said here, because that's the way I will learn, right? So this should be in a conference like this, which is very familiar, small little setup is great, right? This gives us all an opportunity to actually say how things are, right? So everything is so polished and everything is great and everything goes great. We're not going to have a competitive advantage. And if we have one thing which is different in Europe generally, and a bit broad stroke assessment, is exactly that availability, right? We're not so, I guess, collective in a sense, and have the appearances that everything has to work well. We have actually that individual advantage of being an individual culture for the good and the bad, right? But there's also its trip hazards of being a bit more isolated and sort of everyone for themselves, right? But we also have at least that ethos, I guess, to speak to each other and show some vulnerability. Next slide, please. That brings us to the last slide. So the next line, like this made it even on the slide. Never ending reaching, not arriving, is called mastery. Just keep on going, right? Keep on pushing. And again, this day, so these 2 days will be wasted if you're not really using the time to learn from each other. And this to illustrate this, so this picture you see here, my beautiful wife, which is with me here in the front rows, first conference. I'm feeling very proud to have my wife with me, right? The past it was at the mother, have the mother on a school day. I've known my wife this first time. Great. Anyway, we took this picture here as we work in our honeymoon walk, right? We were married for 3 years, 730 kilometers across different Alps of Switzerland, Italy, French Alps, back to Switzerland, right? So challenge us on that one too, if you like. And this was the picture just taken there. So it's as anything, right? Any big journey like AI or any other big journey starts first of all with the first step, and then just keep on going, keep on pushing. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I hand it over to the next speaker.